Every group has their own slang, their own lingo, and if you've ever been in the military, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It seems like there's an acronym for everything in the military. In firefighting, they're no different. So in this video, I want to touch on 49 different common acronyms that you'll hear in the fire service, or if you hang out with people around the fire service, and tell you what they are. Now I'm going to try and make this as least boring as possible, as opposed to me just reading off a whole bunch of letters to you. I'll try and tell you a little bit about it, give you a little bit of background. I'm familiar with a lot of them. I'm not that familiar with others, but we're going to go through so at least you have an idea of what they are. If you hear them or you come across them, you're not just totally confused as to what they're talking about. If you like this video and you find this helpful, click the thumbs up below. Subscribe to the channel. You guys have been very helpful and very responsive with your feedback, so I appreciate that. And let's get started. The first one is CPR. Now, most people know what CPR is, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Now, as a firefighter, you're not necessarily going to be required to do CPR, but you'll probably have to have a BLS certificate, which stands for Basic Life Support, because you'll be first responding to incidents, you'll be showing up at car accidents, you'll be doing things like that. So you might be required to take a CPR class. Number two, PPE stands for Personal Protective Equipment. Now, everybody's familiar with PPE these days with the N95 mask and maybe gloves, but firefighters use a lot of PPE. We use turnout gear, we use SCBAs, we do use gloves, firefighting gloves, and you know, just basic rubber gloves, N95 masks. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we use, and it all qualifies under the umbrella of personal protective equipment. Number three, SCBA stands for Self-Contained Breathing Apparatus, and that is not to be confused with SCUBA, which stands for Self-Contained Underwater Breathing Apparatus. You see firefighters with the big packs on their back. Well, all of that air in there is what they're breathing when they're in a bad situation, and that's known as your SCBA. FDC stands for Fire Department Connection. Next time you pull up to a large building, a big department store, a mall, apartment building, something like that, look around the outside of the building. You'll probably see somewhere a sign that has an arrow pointing down that says FDC. Well, what that stands for is Fire Department Connection, and that is any building that is sprinkler, especially large grocery stores, things like that. It's an area where fire departments can take their hose and they can attach it from their engine to that to kind of supplement the sprinkler system in the building. Very useful. Most people don't notice them just because they're very common. They're pretty much on every commercial building, but next time you're out, take a look, see if you can spot an FDC. Next is ICS, which stands for Incident Command System. It is just a uniform approach nationwide of how to approach any sort of natural disaster, any sort of incident, a fire scene, something like that. People have designated roles. They take those roles and each role has designated responsibilities. I won't go into that in this video, but it's an entire thing. There's several classes on it, but Incident Command System is something that you'll hear inevitably. LODD. LODD stands for Line of Duty Death. Pretty self-explanatory. Whenever a firefighter dies during the course of their day or their work, it's classified as a LODD or a Line of Duty Death. Next is NIOSH, N-I-O-S-H. NIOSH is National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. And what NIOSH does, and this is really common whenever there's a LODD or a Line of Duty Death, is they will do an entire NIOSH report, which is essentially, it's almost like an investigation where they figure out what happened, what went wrong, what led to this disastrous incident or this person dying or something like that. You'll hear a lot about NIOSH reports in the future. NFIRS stands for National Fire Incident Reporting System. Whenever you see national statistics on, well, there's less fires now than there were 5 years ago, or there's more car accidents, or there's more of this type of incident or response, those are from NFIRS reports. Anytime there's an event or something like that that happens, whether it be a rescue, a fire, whatever, whoever the officer is has to come back and write what's known as a NFIRS report. That gets reported to your state, which then gets reported to somewhere else. Next, MABAS, M-A-B-A-S. That stands for Mutual Aid Box Alarm System. Now, everybody's familiar with the expressions 2-alarm, 3-alarm, 4-alarm fire. It's the same sort of idea. What happens is if there's an incident or a fire in a particular area or city or district, a lot of times it will immediately call for mutual aid, which means people from other districts or other cities or other departments will come help. Depending on how big the incident is, it may go further and further and further out. Well, dispatch has their own set of instructions as the first alarm or the first people we call for mutual aid are these cities, and they are sending an engine, a truck, an ambulance, whatever. If the incident is still out of control and we need to expand that for another group of cities and who brings what, that's all based in your MABAS system. Next, AO stands for apparatus operator. Essentially, that's the person that drives. There's tons of different apparatus in the fire service, mainly fire engines and fire trucks. That's usually the person that operates and drives whatever that vehicle is. Slicers, S-L-I-C-E-R-S. For all the fire nerds out there that like to talk tactics, SLICER stands for size up, locate, identify, cool, extinguish, rescue, salvage. Essentially, think of it like an order of operations for how to attack a fire scene. First thing you're going to do is size up, then you're going to locate the fire, you're going to identify the flow path, cool the area, in other words, spray water on it, extinguish, rescue anybody that might be trapped or anything that's going on, and then try and salvage. It's just an acronym for a way to attack a fire. CAD, Computer Aided Dispatch. Almost every public safety vehicle has a computer with a monitor in it that tells you basic stuff like what type of call you're going to, the address of that call, things like that. It's just computer-aided dispatch instead of somebody constantly repeating that to you. Next, CAFS, C-A-F-S. C-A-F-S stands for Compressed Air Foam System, and it's a certain type of fire suppression system. We have it on a rescue truck. I've never actually used it, so I don't know a ton about it, but it's just a type of suppression system as opposed to hoses spraying water like most people are familiar with. CISD. CISD stands for Critical Incident Stress Debriefing. As a firefighter, you're going to have to see a lot of tragic things. You're going to have to see a lot of people burned, a lot of dead people, maybe some sort of abuse or something like that going on, elderly abuse, child abuse. CISD comes in after a stressful incident, and they're just people that you sit down and talk to, and they kind of debrief with you. Some people like them, other people really don't. Just, you know, it's kind of a personal thing, how you deal with tragedy and loss, but that's what that is. I'm sure inevitably you'll hear of a CISD member or a CISD at some point. CPAT, Candidate Physical Abilities Test. It's just a fitness test. It's a standard fitness test that almost every firefighter in the country has to take in order to become a firefighter. AC, BC, and DC stands for Assistant Chief, Battalion Chief, and or Deputy/District Chief. They're just different levels. Fire departments have a general structure. Not all fire departments have assistant chiefs or battalion chiefs or deputy chiefs. They will usually have one. The larger departments will usually have all three of those things. So just different ranks in the fire service and ones that you may come across. EDITH, E-D-I-T-H, stands for Exit Drills in the Home. This is what, when you go teach fire safety classes at local schools, you teach them EDITH, just basic drills for them to go to, how to get out from their bedroom or whatever. Pretty self-explanatory. EMI, Emergency Management Institute. They're part of FEMA, or they at least work with FEMA in some form. They essentially just help Homeland Security. Stands for Emergency Management Institute. I don't know much about them. I've never really dealt with them, but that's something you may come across at some point in one of your classes. EMTB, EMTI, and EMTP. Those are just the different rankings, categories of emergency medical technicians. Basic, intermediate, and paramedic. Basic is the most basic, intermediate obviously is intermediate, and paramedic is the most advanced and the most trained of the emergency medical services. It doesn't really have anything to do with fire, but a lot of firefighters are EMTs, so just know those are your three options. ERG stands for Emergency Response Guidebook. Now this is, I think it's typically like a little orange book, and it's pretty much on all fire trucks and ambulances. And essentially what it is it gives you a rundown of if there's a whole bunch of stuff, but if there's a chemical spill, how far should you be away? Where should you set up different zones? What's involved with this? How do you extinguish this? How do you, whatever. It's a really important book that is really overlooked most of the time. So ERG, Emergency Response Guidebook. EVOC stands for Emergency Vehicle Operator Course. Firefighters don't have to have a CDL to drive a fire truck, but chances are they will have to pass an EVOC course. It just goes over the basics of how to drive a truck, lights and sirens, what you do have the rights to do, what you don't have the rights to do, things like that. FDIC, Fire Department Instructors Conference. Now this happens in Indiana every year, and it's a huge conference where all the different fire-related companies come out and talk about their products, but it's also where a lot of instructors get to teach courses, and it's really good if you are an officer in your department or you have been in the fire service for a little while. If you're brand new, don't worry about FDIC, but inevitably you will come across it and you'll hear about it. Next is IAFF. Now, almost everybody's heard of the IAFF. If you've ever seen somebody's car with that little red Maltese cross in the back window, that's an IAFF sticker. IAFF stands for International Association of Firefighters. It's one of the biggest unions in the world, and they are the international union for firefighters. Now, each state kind of has their own as well. Where I'm at in Ohio, we have the OAPFF, Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters, that kind of represents and just hangs out in Ohio. But they're all interrelated and they're all interconnected somehow. Also, the IAFF has a conference, I believe it's every other year, every 2 years, the IAFF does a conference somewhere in the United States, so that's something else as well. HAZMAT, H-A-Z-M-A-T, pretty self-explanatory. Hazardous materials, you're gonna be dealing with a lot of hazardous materials as a firefighter, and you'll be using that ERG, or the Emergency Response Guidebook. IC, Incident Command. That is the person that is in charge of the incident. Usually it's a chief. When the incident first happens, if it's a house fire, it's whoever the officer is, or if there's no officer, whoever's the first there that's the most senior. They're the person that orchestrates everything that's going on. Incoming units, what units are in, what units are doing, all sorts of stuff. IC, Incident Command. IFSAC stands for International Fire Service Accreditation Congress. Essentially, this is the body that determines curriculum, that does the accreditation for different classes and things like that. All education, especially if you go to college, something like that, there's all sorts of accrediting bodies that say, yep, this is good. They're that for the fire service. JPR stands for Job Performance Requirements. When you're a new guy, when you're a rookie, when you're a probie, whatever, you will be required to have JPR signed off on by a senior man or a senior officer or whatever. JPRs just make sure you know what you're doing when it comes to different activities on the fireground. PAR, Personnel Accountability Report. Now, PAR is something, if you ever listen to radio traffic, every once in a while you might hear somebody asking for PAR or saying what their PAR is. When there's a group of firefighters inside of a building during an incident, a PAR report just says, you know, if 3 people went in on this fire, PAR is, are all 3 of you guys still there? Personnel Accountability Report. You'll usually hear it at the end of a radio report. You'll hear them say PAR 3 or PAR 4, PAR 2, whatever, however many people went in. LDH, Large Diameter Hose. If you're really unfamiliar with the fire service and you see those giant hoses that are 5 inches in diameter that are hooked up to fire hydrants, that's LDH, Large Diameter Hose. MDT, Mobile Data Terminal. That's similar to this CAD, the Computer Automated Dispatch. I'm not sure exactly what the intricacies are of the difference of what the Mobile Data Terminal is, but essentially all of that data about where the call is, what type of call it is, all that has to get stored somewhere, and that's also goes hand in hand with that CAD system on every emergency vehicle. MSDS, Material Safety Data Sheet. This also goes hand in hand with HAZMAT and the ERG. Whenever there's some sort of, like if a truck overturns and there's some sort of chemical or something like that in there, or there's a spill or an explosion of some sort, all of these industrial types of situations, they have to have an MSDS sheet, which Material Safety Data Sheet just tells you what this is, how to clean it up safely, how to approach it safely, what the dangers are going to be involved with it. It's essentially just tells first responders that this is what just spilled, this is what the problem is. NFPA stands for National Fire Protection Association. Those are the people that make the rules. NFPA has all sorts of rules on pretty much everything that you can imagine, ranging from what type of gear you have to wear to how many people can go into a fire at once. They set the guidelines, they set the rules. NIMS, National Incident Management System. These are classes, and it's an entire system that kind of goes with the ICS that tells you how to respond to different types of things. There's a whole bunch of different classes. I promise you will have to take one at some point. I think the most common one is NIMS 700 or NIMS 100. I don't remember. Just a heads up, they're really boring, but they're actually really important, so you have to do those. NST stands for National Standard Thread. The threading on fire hoses and fire hydrants has to match. Obviously, if the threads don't match, you can't screw the hose onto the hydrant or onto other hoses. So National Standard Thread is a size and type of threading on all of these things. NVFC stands for National Volunteer Fire Council. They're the people that just represent and advocate for volunteer firefighters. OOS, if you ever see something that says OOS on it, don't use it. It stands for Out of Service. Pretty basic acronym. Obviously, if something's out of service, something's wrong, it's broken, whatever. PASS, P-A-S-S, stands for Personal Alert Safety System. Now, if you've ever been on a fire scene or if you've ever seen videos of firefighters and you see them standing around too long, you'll hear something start to beep or ding or some sort of, kind of like up and down melody. Whenever that is, you have to move and it'll stop it, and it'll stop it for 20 seconds. Now, what the point of the pass is if a firefighter is down somewhere and they haven't moved, this pass will start to alarm, and then it'll go a little bit louder, and then it'll go into what's known as a full alarm, and it alerts other people to this is where this person fell down or this is where this person is. It's just a way to locate firefighters in a dangerous situation. ppm. Parts per million. It's just a form of measurement for things like natural gas, CO, just tells you how much of that is in the air. Or I guess you can do it in water too for other things, but parts per million. PPV, positive pressure ventilation. There's negative pressure and there's positive pressure. Positive pressure is when you are pushing something out of a given area. Most commonly used is when you have to ventilate a house or get something like that out. You'll open a window or one location, and then you'll put a huge fan at the front door, and it'll force all of the air in the house to kind of go force through and force out that one location, just ventilating with positive pressure. VES, also known as VEIS, which stands for Vent, Enter, Search, or Vent, Enter, Isolate, Search. If you've ever seen in the movies where somebody's hanging out the window waving for help at the firefighters, and then all of a sudden they go down, that's a way to go into the window of a structure, of a house, or of a building. You essentially, what VES is, you go up, you take out the window, so that's the vent part. You enter, you go into the house or wherever you're going into, and then search for whoever that was. But the new acronym is Vent, Enter, Isolate, Search. You're supposed to close the door in whatever room that is so that the fire doesn't come your way because you just took out the window and you don't want to draw the fire to you. It's just an acronym, a different one for firefighting tactics. Speaking of tactics, I don't even know how you would pronounce this. RECEO-VS. It stands for Rescue, Exposure, Confine, Extinguish, Overhaul, Ventilate, Salvage. It's very similar to the SLICERS acronym. For those fire nerds that like to discuss tactics nonstop, and you know who you are if you're out there, this is just another way to attack a fire. It talks about different tactics. You start by rescuing people, look for any exposures and protect those, confine, extinguish, overhaul. Again, it's just an acronym to help people remember the steps to attack a fire. RIC or RIT stands for Rapid Intervention Crew or Rapid Intervention Team. These are the two firefighters usually that are on standby at a fire scene during an incident, whose job is solely to, if somebody goes down, go in and get that person and get them back out. They have some specialized training and some specialized tools that they use to make sure firefighters stay alive. SFM stands for State Fire Marshal. That's the person in your state that is the boss that sets the rules for fire prevention, fire investigations, things like that. He's the highest authority in your state. SOG or SOP, Standard Operating Guidelines or Procedures. Every department has these. This can range from anything for how you have to have your hair cut when you work for that department to when there's a fire and there's an incident, what trucks go to what trucks in what areas, who's mutual aid. There's all sorts of standard procedures and guidelines, and that's what that is. I promise you, if you are new, you will be spending a lot of time reading SOGs and SOPs. UL, Underwriters Laboratories. This is just a safety certification company. If you look at any, God, there's so many products with that UL logo on it. They're the people that test it and make sure that it's safe. They do a lot with fire service types of things, so look for the UL logo, Underwriters Laboratories. BLEVE, B-L-E-V-E, Boiling Liquid Expansion Vapor Explosion. This has to do a lot, you'll see this with propane tanks, those giant propane tanks outside of buildings. When one of those kicks off and it is burning, eventually that container can't handle it anymore and it will explode. Really scary, really big deal when that happens, so hopefully you never have to deal with a BLEVE. IDLH, immediately dangerous to life and health. IDLH environments is where you need to wear your SCBA, because if you take that mask off and you're not on air, chances are it will kill you, if not hurt you really bad. So IDLH environments are ones that are immediately dangerous to life and health. That doesn't mean just fires, by the way. That means chemical spills, poisonous chemicals, things like that are also considered IDLH environments. MA stands for mutual aid. I talked about the MABAS box earlier. When there's a fire or some sort of incident, cities or districts from all around come send people to help. They're considered the mutual aid. And then finally, TIC, T-I-C, Thermal Imaging Camera. It's usually a little handheld device that firefighters carry around with them into a fire to see where the flames are, see if, I'm in a room right now, if there's a fire behind this wall right here, you can kind of point it at the wall and it'll tell me the temperature back behind the wall. It's just a device that's commonly used to find firefighters, but also to tell where the heat is, where the fire might be, especially if it's up in the walls or up above you and you can't see it. So I hope you found that helpful. Sorry if that was a little long-winded. Those are very common acronyms that you will come across at some point in your fire career, or maybe you're not interested in being a firefighter, you just want to know some more acronyms. Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.